Welcome to the Frontlines. I'm Lyndsay Malchuk. I'm sitting down today with Rowland Brown, CEO of Cirrus Capital, one of the key architects behind the growth and maturity of Namibia's capital markets at a time when the country is suddenly on the global radar for uranium, oil, and gas potential. So first off, welcome to the show, Rowland. It's so great to have you here.
Thanks for the invite.
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, so, no complaints there. Now, Rowland, Namibia is being whispered in investor circles more and more as the next strategic resource jurisdiction. However, from where you sit, is the world still underestimating just how big this moment could be for the country?
Yes and no. I think what we can see happening at the moment is that we are very much kind of coming onto the global stage. Yeah. The US ambassador to Namibia has been down here in the Cape, for example, and making a lot of very interesting comments about the US's interest in Namibia and strategic minerals in Namibia. Mm-hmm. There's certainly a lot of interest from the East when it comes to Namibia and also from Russia. And I think now with Total Energies and others, there's also quite a lot of European interest in Namibia. I think from a Namibian perspective, there's probably a pretty good understanding of the potential that sits inside our borders, but we haven't really been on the global stage like this before. Obviously, we've been a uranium producer for a long time, and a very big uranium producer. We're the third biggest uranium producer in the world. But I think that going forward, just the uranium industry is going to take off. It seems very likely that we're in a sort of renaissance, a new age of nuclear energy.
Right.
And with AI and some of these huge energy requirements, it just seems very likely that nuclear is going to have a second major wind now. And Namibia sits very well positioned for that. But in addition to that, we've also got we've got a lot of copper deposits. We've got gold deposits, and then quite a lot of rare earth deposits as well. So there's a number of lithium deposits, some heavy metals, etc. So from that perspective, I think the country is very well positioned, really. And I think that the opportunities are enormous. It's just how we develop the architecture that we need to turn all of that potential into human development and improving the lives of the local population and so on. And I think that's, where a lot of the focus is at the moment.
Well, you hear it in a lot of the conferences we go to. It's such a whisper that seems to be growing a lot louder to do with uranium as well as oil and gas. Yeah. So that's coming back. So, you hear about the clean energy, but there's still such a mix because we still need the traditional as well going forward. So it's an interesting perspective that we're definitely in right now.
Yeah, I mean, the same way that there's a nuclear renaissance sort of upon us or just ahead of us, I think that oil and gas is really come back into the focus.
Yeah.
Not that it ever truly disappeared. I mean, global demand for oil and gas increases every year, contrary to sort of popular belief. We're consuming more and more oil and gas every year. It was just a sort of painted with a bit of a negative brush. But from an energy density and energy intensity perspective, we will keep using oil and gas for the foreseeable future in very large quantities. And I think a lot of the world is kind of seeing the folly of a race to green that's too aggressive and unrealistic. Access to energy is so fundamentally important for leveraging human efficiency, leveraging our time, allowing people to live comfortable lives, and so on. And it's just very, very unlikely that we'll find something that can truly replace oil and gas, and gas especially. I mean, I'm perhaps a little bit of an outlier when it comes to this, but I think it's going to be more than just oil and gas. I think coal's going to make a resurgence in a big way as well. Yeah,
interesting.
I think it's inevitable.
Now, as we're going to continue with oil and gas, as a new oil and gas discovery starts pulling global attention more and more south, of course, how important is energy leverage to Namibia's long-term economic independence?
Well, Namibia actually is very interesting in the sense that oil and gas, for me and for our firm in our analysis, we really talk about it as gravy. The potential that sits in Namibia has been very substantial for a long time. I mean, we're geostrategically very relevant. South Africa, Namibia, this is kind of the last major choke point that the US doesn't have significant control of into the Atlantic. And the US obviously wants to control particularly the North Atlantic. And this southern tip of Africa is the one kind of remaining choke point that hasn't received all that much focus. And I think that will change. I think it's just a matter of time before you see the US really turning its attention to the Southern Cape here. So Namibia is, quite relevant in that regard. And we've got these good ports or particularly good port at Walvis Bay. And I think that's going to become something that the world pays quite a bit of attention to.
Right.
And then there's, all these landlocked countries and kind of complicated countries to our east and to our north. And those countries are big populations, fast growing. They need, access to ports. To play in the sort of global logistics world, they need access to ports. Namibia's got good infrastructure. We've got good road. There's a big focus on upgrading rail at the moment. Our rail infrastructure is quite old and not great, but it's, quite rightly the primary infrastructural focus of our government at the moment. And so that upgrading of rail can be a huge enabler for further regional logistics development and similar. And so I think from that perspective, we're quite well positioned as well. And then we have per capita very good mineral resources. We've got not the best grades of everything or the most of everything, but we're only 3 million people. So per capita, you've got, large amounts of minerals. Very diverse country with huge tourism opportunities. So lots of hard currency earnings. Yeah. I mean, frankly, one of our biggest economic challenges is that our population is small. And if we see very strong growth, we will literally run out of people. We'll have to import skills and labor and so on. So this is really a good problem to have. And then, we've got lots of other things going for us as well. I mean, it's a 36-year-old country, and we've been stable and peaceful, and it's a relatively harmonious population. So I think that there's a lot going for the country long before you have oil and gas. And the oil and gas can really be the gravy on top. But of course, there's, with oil, there's a blessing and a curse. And you need to make sure that you maximize on one and minimize on the other. And not everybody has been very good at that. Luckily, Namibia does have a track record of managing natural resources. So we've got fish resources, we've discussed mineral resources. And managing those resources, I think, has given us some experience. And we know where a lot of the risks are around privatization of the resource rents.
Yeah.
And so I'm hopeful that we can get it right. I think that it will be a challenge. It's a challenge for any country. But I think the chances are better than average that we'll manage to turn it into something that's beneficial for the country.
Yeah. I mean, you guys are very, very rich in all of those aspects that you just spoke about. And, with that, I'm going to push it a little bit further here, Rowland. At the same time, we are seeing more emphasis on local participation in financing. So how critical is that Namibian investors actually own part of their own resource future instead of watching it just leave the country?
Yeah, so it's a good point. And, I think it makes sense that we try to maximize Namibian ownership of resources as and where we can. Mm-hmm. It becomes problematic if a push for local ownership means that a mine doesn't get developed, for example. And so striking this balance is important. And basically, the big question is, if you come to Namibia and you extract minerals in Namibia, what do you pay the people that these minerals belong to? So our constitution is very clear that, the minerals underneath the surface in the country belong to the people of the country. So what do you pay in order to extract those? And there's a whole lot of different models that are pursued globally. In the Namibian instance, there's firstly a higher corporate tax rate, so not the same corporate tax rate that you'd pay as a financial service company or something like that. There's higher corporate tax rates for the various different minerals. And then there's also some royalty charges, so top line charges, and then there's various other export levies and similar. And there's certainly a perception amongst some that Namibia is not really getting its fair share. If you look at it in detail, you'll see that Namibia, for the most part, does actually very well from its mineral resources. It's just that most of the benefits go through the fiscus and then in the form of tax, and then going into the fiscus, it sort of becomes part of a bit of a black box. It goes into the kind of fiscal slush fund, and then it's very difficult to draw the links between the money coming in and how it's used and so on. So that's one side of it. And I think, there's certainly optimization that can and should be done around the tax regime in order to get this balance right, to ensure that there's plenty of investment and that we don't chase investors away, and knowing that mineral prices are very cyclical and so on, while at the same time ensuring that, when the miners are gone, there's plenty left, plenty of development and so on that's taken place as a result. But the mining industry is very much the backbone of the Namibian economy. And without the capital intensity of the mining industry, we certainly wouldn't have a lot of the infrastructure that we have, the energy infrastructure, the port infrastructure, and similar. And the capital intensity of the industry really is a huge enabler for a lot of the rest of the economy. Because of the mining industry, we have this good energy infrastructure, which is then very beneficial for, the other sectors, the agricultural sector, the fishing sectors, and similar. And so from that perspective, the industry contributes a huge amount. In terms of the actual ownership, and we're doing more and more work on this, and Cirrus, amongst other things, has done a number of local listings of mining projects, and dual listings of mining projects and similar, and some capital raises. And so we're actually raising exploration capital in Namibia from Namibian investors, generally more individuals, so high net worth individuals and so on. But we actually have institutional investors now investing into the exploration space and similar, especially now that it's become, quite an exciting space again with the commodity price upswing that we see at the moment. But we need more of it. And I think that's very much what we push for and what we're working on, amongst other things. And I think over the next few years, you're going to see more and more Namibian participation in the form of ownership of mining projects, exploration projects, and similar. And then, of course, there's been a big push over the years to have to do as much local procurement as possible. And so if you look at the industry as a whole, a huge amount of its procurement is done locally. Not all of it. And obviously, there's things you can't buy, Caterpillar equipment produced in Namibia and things like that. So there's big sections of the industry that are not yet Namibian, where the procurement's not done from Namibians. But, I think more and more of the local procurement is done from Namibian sources as and where possible. So it's you always would like to have more, but I think it's certainly moving in the right direction. Then the big question is the downstream value addition, so-called value addition. Often it's not really suitable to call it value addition because further processing may actually be done at a loss. But that for the so-called beneficiation, that's still a great bone of contention. I think there's a big push at the moment from the government to try to have more value add in country or processing in country. And this is a double-edged sword. There's instances where I think it makes a lot of sense and where, perhaps there's a little regulatory push needed in order to move things in that direction. But there's many instances where it just doesn't make sense. To take the uranium oxide that we produce and turn it into UF6, it would cost something close to our GDP.
Wow.
It is a very small economy. There's only 3 million people, as I mentioned. But it would take, a huge amount of investment. It'll create very few jobs. It's hyper specialized. You'd have to import pretty much all the equipment, and very few jobs. And then it would add very little. You add very little value in that step. So to sort of skip that step and move on to, later steps in the process and perhaps become a nuclear energy producer at some point and things like this, that may make sense. But to take it one step further, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. Now on copper, it's a different story potentially. On gold, it's a different story potentially. It's quite likely that we'll go from having 2 gold mines to 4 gold mines in a relatively short period of time. So one's being constructed at the moment and the other one has applied for a mining license recently. And then you start to get the scale that may justify a refinery. It's probably still a bit too small, but you're starting to get somewhere where it may make sense. And then on the zinc side, zinc and copper, certainly there's some smelting that can be done. The big challenge, input costs. Energy is expensive, so input costs. But if we see some of the developments that we're expecting in the energy generation space, I think that we will sit with surpluses. So there's a big hydro dam that will likely be developed in the next 10 odd years. And then also, if the oil and gas moves ahead, it's likely that we'll have an onshore gas power plant at some point as well.
Wow.
And with that, you'll obviously have more energy supply, but it won't necessarily be cheap. And so anyway, so there's complexity around those sorts of things. But I think generally speaking, the industry is very, very fundamental to the local economy, and it contributes a lot more than people realize, I think, sometimes. But there is always a desire to have more, and, you know, where it's practical to do more locally, I think that it makes sense, and one should try and embrace that.
Absolutely. It's about the community.
You have to be realistic.
Yeah. It's about keeping that community together and part of preserving the land and preserving the history there. Well, it's been a great conversation. Thank you so much for just coming and pulling the curtain back a lot more about Namibia. I think we could continue this conversation for hours to come, but thank you again for just giving us a little insight.
Thanks for the invite.
Now, where can we find out more about you? What's your website?
So Cirrus is a diversified financial services company. We basically do everything in the financial service space except banking.
Okay.
And but we have an asset management arm. We do unlisted investments. We have a stockbroking arm, and we do a lot of corporate finance work. We compete with the big investment banks in terms of the volumes and transaction sizes that we do. It's a 9-year-old company now, so it's still in its infancy when compared to our competitors. But, you know, I think we've got a very good reputation in Namibia. We've got a big client base. We work within the region. We've done quite a bit of work in Zambia and Angola, and we have a lot of clients down here in South Africa as well. So we're kind of all over Southern Africa. And yeah, you can find out more about us. Our website, cirrus.com.na. So very straightforward.
Very straightforward. Well, perfect. Thank you again. I look forward to talking to you again, too.
Thanks a lot.
Again, that was Rowland Brown from Cirrus Capital. And my name is Lyndsay Malchuk. This has been the Market Frontlines with Abaton Media, and we will see you next time.